Hi boys and girls, and welcome to the first episode of Math with Mia. Today we're going to be doing lesson 12.2, and Mia's going to be here to help me. Okay, so if you will take out your math books, and I want you to go ahead and turn to page 449. And if you turn to page 449, you're going to see that we're going to be doing fractions and decimals on a number line. So when you first see it, it looks maybe a little tricky, but we've had some practice with this when we did line plots. So you can see our whole numbers 0 and 1, and there are 10 spaces in between. So that means that the line is divided into tenths. So when we start counting the spaces on the line, we'll have 1/10, 2/10, and so on. So I can see that point A, and I'm going to do fractions and decimals, not just fractions or decimals, but fractions and decimals. So I can see that point A is at 1.1/10 for the fraction and 1/10 for the decimal. And then I can keep counting by tenths on my number line. And when I get to point B, that would be 5/10. And then I can also write that as a fraction and as a decimal. Now let's take a look at this one down here, because you can see my whole numbers here are between 3, 4, and 5. But again, there's 10 spaces here, so that's counting by tenths. It's just that this time there's also going to be a whole number. So if we go to the place right after 3, that's going to be 3 1/10. And then where G is, point G, that's going to be 3 2/10. So when I write that one, I'll put that over here. I'm going to write it as a mixed number, 3 2/10, and I'm going to write it as a decimal, 3 2/10. Now I bet you can do the rest of these on your own. Now I'd like you to go to page 450, because when I first saw this, I was like, what in the world is going on here? And then I realized that's like a magnifying glass, because they were trying to show hundredths, that these hundredths come between 3 7/10 and 3 8/10. So the thing to remember here is that just imagine if we had 100 spaces on a number line. We'd never have room for that. So we have to realize that between 3 7/10 and 3 8/10, we have spaces there too. So we know that 3 7/10 is equivalent to 3 70/100. See, that's what they wrote down here. And 3 8/10 is equivalent to 3 80/100, and that's what they wrote here. And then they zoomed in on that section to show you that space that was there. So I know now I can just count by hundreds. 3 70/100, 71/100, 72/100, 73/100, 74/100, and 75/100 right here. So I know that 75 is exactly halfway between 70 and 80. So I can just plot that point right there, halfway between 3 7/10 and 3 8/10. Now let's take a quick look at this one down here. It says which decimal shown on the number line is not placed in the correct location. So again, I can see that we have our whole numbers 0, 1, and 2. And there are 10 spaces. So I know to count by tenths. So we have 1/10, that's the decimal, but we could also do the fraction. 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, and oops, we found the mistake. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? And that would be 7/10, and then we can keep labeling this number line. So you don't need to explain this since we did this together. Just finish this one on your own. And then you'll find more practice of this too in your homework book if you want to do that as well. Let's just take a quick check at some of the papers that I sent home with you when I delivered your bag to you. Take a look at this paper right here. Notice that the blue is supposed to be 2/10. So make sure you're not just coloring 2 of these squares, because you can see there's way more than 10 squares. So it's 2/10, 2 out of 10. Well, there are 100 squares here. So we want to make an equivalent fraction for hundreds. So remember, 2/10 times 10/10, that equals 20 hundredths. So make sure you've colored in 20 hundredths of those. Okay. Now, if you did do this correctly, all of these will be colored in. So make sure you do a double check on that. Don't forget to use these tools for helping you, your chart. You can use the back of this one as well. This is another tool that you have at your disposal. This was also delivered with your things. And this can also show you the connection between hundredths and tenths. Thank you, and see you next time on Math with Mia.